Okay, here we are in part three of the breakdown of the Marxist doublespeak from the Brookings Institute and the Tomassi discussion. If you haven't seen the first two parts, it's going to be the final one here. Go back and give some good context as to why I'm doing this and who this individual is and what he's all about. Let's go ahead and just listen to the first one, finish this off, and I'll react to it after.
Is happening in society to manufacture that many men who felt unheard. A third of men not having any sex, 80% of men on dating apps being deemed unattractive. What manufactured that? We wouldn't. He doesn't have those search results unless there's a group of men that don't feel heard. What's making them not feel heard?
Well, I think the first thing is that
he's talking about the search results of Andrew Tate being the most searched man through 2022. And listen, that's a good question. He's asking, why do men feel so disenfranchised? And this is, to me, a mic drop moment. Listen to this dodge.
it is back to the transgression point, which is that if it's really transgressive to point out that a lot of boys and men are really struggling in school and in relationships.
But a lot of
Okay, I'll try to remember that one for later. If it's really transgressive to question this, well, why would it be transgressive? But just tuck that one away. That'll be for later.
are really struggling.
They are really struggling, right? And so this is, if you have a group of people who are really struggling and pointing that out and trying to do something about it is something that mainstream institutions and responsible people are not doing, and that becomes like a shocking thing to point out. I think that's part of it. And so what's happened is there's this real reservoir of actual need and hurt and struggle among a lot of men and boys. And if that's not being articulated, discussed in sort of mainstream forums, then the appetite to hear about that is still there. So we create a vacuum. The failure.
Okay, you guys, you see it? You hear it? He didn't answer the question at all. He just repeated, we know that there's a huge reservoir to address the issues as to why men are struggling and not being heard, and it's very transgressive to even ask the question. He asked, why is that? Now, I've already repeated it ad nauseum throughout this analysis as to why it is. We all know. It's of the massive attack against men, boys, family, masculinity, the history of it, the narrative of feminism, of men being evil demons for all of history, etc. It doesn't say a word on it. Let's just hear a little bit more of what he has to say on this, and then we'll go on to the next.
Of mainstream institutions and media organizations to be talking just straightforwardly about these issues creates a vacuum.
You said when responsible people do not have this conversation, irresponsible people will start to have this conversation.
They'll exploit them, and they might exploit them for clicks. They might exploit them for monetary value. So, I think it's Andrew Tate to that extent is our fault.
Yep, he's a terrible thing because we haven't been addressing these issues. Okay, put Tate aside whether you like him or not. He already said it's transgressive to talk about these things. Why is it transgressive? I'm going to be making extensive content off the jump here. That's the next thing I'm going to pivot into right away when I was doing research last night for more material and coming across so much about this. It was something that I think we're going to get to in this one, or he might have touched on already, about how just insane it is to him that there could be an agenda here and people actually planning this out. But what he's going to go to here is that the responsible people, how many times have we heard this for the years? The obtuseness, once again, I'm wearing that word out. The absolute obtuseness or complete lying, untruthfulness, mendacity of this individual is just off the charts that anybody would take this seriously in any way, shape, or form. The responsible people were the ones, did any of you all remember that one from a year or two ago? What was it? Who was that talking head? Chris, God, his name escapes me. The guy that got fired from CNN. He literally said, talking about some kind of information leak. I can't remember what it was, if it was on the COVID agenda, if it was on something about Russia, that, hey, it's illegal for you to see these. Only us can see these. We are the trusted sources. We're the only ones that can talk about these narratives. And this is basically what he's saying here, that irresponsible people talking about these things. Oh, that's a no-no. We can't have that. It's going to cause a lot of damage. Who are the irresponsible people? Me, right here on this microphone, and thousands or millions of others addressing these. And he hasn't been seeing this, and he may not have even been seeing it. They just don't care of really what's going on. It's just their agenda. They haven't seen this whole complete, total censorship agenda, especially through the pandemic years of the last few years. It's off the charts. It's falling apart. And millions and millions of people worldwide have seen right through it. They're completely tired of it. They won't have any more of it. And here he goes once again, but these are the ones you got to come to.
And by our fault, I mean mainstream institutions, think tanks, government, universities, who aren't talking about these problems of boys and men, or if they're doing it in a way that's kind of a semi-embarrassed, quick. Could we get this over with?
Yeah, like him. He said think tanks in there. He works for a think tank. Incredible.
To make that point on Dr. Phil, I was saying, we could not have that conversation. Right. Even the conversation we were having on Dr. Phil, we could not have that at a major university without getting shouted down.
And I think I said that I am actually having that conversation at universities now, which I am. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm doing it.
Yeah, and how's he doing in that conversation, do you figure? Exactly like he is here. Just gatekeeping.
But I think partly I'm creating permission. I think what I'm doing...
Another mic drop moment. He's creating permission. Just go in and chop it all up and take out all the meat and talk about the feels and whatnot. Then they'll let you talk about it.
Because I'm coming up with all these
permission
facts.
for the discussion.
Permission for the discussion.
Permission for the discussion.
Right, because it's like, he's a Brookings.
And these guys don't say, what did you just say? We got to get permission for the discussion. I'd have just got up and walked out.
Guy, he's got charts. He seems reasonable. He sounds funny.
Nobody's ever thrown anything at you.
Right, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Okay.
Early days.
That's where you go.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's because, and what I've discovered is that actually most people do want to talk about this.
Can you imagine in the last breakdown where we looked at how he got completely triggered at the mention of the terms mangina and pussy? If somebody were to throw something at this individual, that'd be curtains. He'd probably be in a mental institution for 10 years. Complete, total psychological breakdown.
They just want to talk about it in a way that doesn't require them to give up their prior commitments, say, to the service of women and girls. As long as it's not zero sum, there's a huge appetite out there for this conversation. And if we're not having it...
And that's the way they're always going to frame it. They're going to frame it as though the other side is saying it's got to be zero sum. Common theme all the way through. That if you even talk about these things that are happening, you're trying to roll us back to the terrible 1950s to put women back in chains and slavery. So as long as you're not going to back us up to there, well, nobody wants to back up to there. They just want the horrible injustices and disenfranchisement of men and attacks against them to stop. That's it.
If I'm not having it, if mainstream institutions aren't having it, someone's having it.
I'm glad you said that, because I have the same discussion in the area of physics or science when we get into vaccines cause autism, we didn't land on the moon, or the earth is flat. And
there's there you go, right there. Right there, anybody listening, right? No, there's no conversation to have about any of those things right there. No, there's not millions and millions of people showing hard evidence questioning these narratives. Lord.
Because normal, accredited PhDs don't want to have this conversation, or MDs don't want to have this conversation with who they...
Yeah, why? Because they get destroyed, that's why, and they have an agenda.
Deemed to be lunatics. Then it ends up on Joe Rogan, who has a bigger audience...
Yeah, as if even Joe Rogan is doing this. Biggest sellout of all history.
Than all of you combined, and now the discussion, because it's not happening between responsible people, it's now happening between irresponsible people.
If there are hard things happening, hard questions, and you just ignore them, right, and hope that that no one will notice them, that doesn't happen. People will notice them, and they will pick them up. I'll give you an example. I was having an argument with, I would describe him as a men's rights activist.
Oh, get ready for this. This is Rich. He just digs in deeper and deeper and deeper, just shovels more cow manure on top of himself. I don't know how we're even seeing him still.
activist. I don't know if he would accept the guy who was a private conversation. He said, well, they don't care about male suicide. I said, okay, who's they? And he said, the government, CDC. I said, I'm sure they do care. Why do you say that? He sent me a link. The link was to the CDC page on disparities in suicide. And it doesn't have a subsection by gender. It does veterans, it does LGBTQ, it doesn't have it. And I'm looking at this while I'm on the phone with this guy, and he's saying, you see, there isn't a section on the CDC website on disparities in suicide that points out that there's a fourfold gap in suicide. And I'm cursing the CDC bureaucrats while I'm on the phone with this guy because I can't tell him he's crazy when they haven't got that on the website. So I'm like, for the love of God, put that on the website. Have a whole section.
Did that strike you all the same way it struck me? Just, we don't even have a mic anymore. There's been so many mic drops. It's got to be in 15 different pieces by now. Just insane. He would never occur to him to say to his buddy, well, geez, maybe you have a point. Maybe these people don't want to address this at all. Or maybe they're completely, totally incompetent. No, his deal is cover it up, make these guys happy. For the love of God, get these stats on your site so we can say, see, they do address it. They just wrote something down on a piece of paper. No qualification again whatsoever. You see the way their mind works? As long as you've got some kind of literature on a screen somewhere that says we're doing something about this, in their nice, pristine academia think tank row, problems addressed. We're well on to solving it. How did we get? Well, I know how we got. That's what all this material is going to be about. How do we get to this stage? Well, tolerating people like this. That's how.
Task force on male mental health. Get the Gender Policy Council to do work on boys and men so that the next...
I get some other Marxist organization, tribunal. The word escapes me, the correct communist term. Committee. That's it. Get another committee, a Marxist committee, to study how we can put some good propaganda on this to make everything sound nice.
Time I'm on the phone with that guy, I can say, you're crazy.
But could it be because there are people in the CDC who are so politically progressive, they do not want to have that stuff?
At least he pushed back a little bit. Give him credit there.
Could that possibly be the reason?
Yeah. I think that's right. I think for some of them, actually, I would
go one step further.
Or they're worried they'll be criticized by.
Well, recently I'm watching. In fact, I did a show or a part of a show last Sunday on this. Ben Shapiro was very concerned that there's these new findings that young girls are attempting suicide more these days, and I'm like. But Jesus Christ, they're not killing themselves at 3.5 to 5 times the rate of guys. But that's what he talks about, and he does not want to talk about the fact that it's been that way.
Okay, valid point. That's a pretty good, a decent pushback, somewhat. But it still didn't answer the question. Why? Why won't they address what is happening to the causes, not the result of what's happened to men? Why it's happened. Through all of that several minutes there, that was the original question. No, not a peep. And I think they know damn well. Because it is an abominable agenda that you cannot even crack that Pandora's box. You're going to have a big problem. Let's go on to the next. Oh, see if I can bring it back just a little bit here.
Would say from the other side of the argument. What I mean by that is the construction of masculinity, and especially mature masculinity, it's just a bit more social. It's a more of a cultural task. It doesn't come quite as naturally, because we don't have quite the same sort of obvious reproductive markers as women. And that's why I think societies have very often had to work quite hard to have certain rites of passage, to have certain ways of learning around what it means to go from boy to man. And so what I mean by the sense it's more fragile is that it is more socially constructed, that it's more of a task for a culture.
Okay, for the uninitiated on Marxism, social constructs. That is textbook Marxism. Constant theme of this whole breakdown that I've been doing here. This is when they really reveal their cards. It's a social construct. It's not that men are filled with testosterone and have way more body mass are taller. You know the deal. I'm not going to bore you with it. And, women have vaginas and can give babies and have breasts in the middle of their chests. And so we're designed and hardwired a certain way. And we had society that more or less for most of the time was congruent with those ways that we're designed. No, it's social constructs. So you see, if you can frame the debate as that way, then as things, according to them, organically change as we become more equal, well, then we'll just have to re-engineer the way people are to fit that.
Culture and for a society to figure out how we're going to help boys to become men, how we're going to teach them what it means to be a good and a mature man. I don't think it comes quite as...
So who's we, do you think? The state? The universities? Right? The work camps that the Marxists are planning on having people? Who did it before? Who did it before? Fathers? Mothers? Uncles? Aunts? Grandparents? Churches? Actually going to a job with proper mentors that taught you a work ethic and a trade and etc.? No, it's like to these guys, they're the new gods, right? No, none of that really. Well, yeah, it existed, but it was all just an abomination. We're the new social engineers. We're the new gods, and we're going to figure this out for you. Just listen to us.
Naturally, as it does for women. Now, it's not to say there aren't social constructions around femininity as well, but I think masculinity is more of a cultural task than femininity is, which is why I don't think you very often hear about a crisis of femininity.
I've written about exactly this too. It's this idea really since the time of the sexual revolution when women start to become more independent. That's when guys start saying, "Well, should I be macho? Should I not be macho?
How should I be?
How should I be?" Kind of thing. We're at a point right now. I think here we are.
Yeah, and once again, this was, I know it's not maybe a very good reference. Then again, maybe it is a pretty good reference. I don't think it's really debated. Is using movies. I think from all accounts, and I'm old enough to even remember this as a young boy of the custom of when a lady walked into the room, men would stand and take off their hats and greet them. How are you, ma'am? Something as such. Good day. Good morning. They would do the same. These were all traditions that were put in place to teach young males how to become men, but not addressed. We could just say, well, we could just use that again instead of having thrown that all out the window, and now everything is going to hell. But once again, no, we can't connect any of those dots. As I said before, what do we think we have here? A PhD from the Brookings Institute? I guess that's not going to work. I guess that's not enough education. Let's see what the next one has to hear.
Is usually representative of what that ideology is.
Yeah, and I agree with the fact that there's this period of flux and uncertainty, and we're asking questions about what does it mean to be a man. By the way, women too. It was true. My grandmother didn't have to. Really
they didn't have to ask that question.
But it's the same for a lot of women now, kind of figuring out how to be a woman. And
why didn't your grandma have to ask that question? The exact same thing that I was just saying. Because there was a whole superstructure of society that raised young ladies, young women, young females, girls, I should say, to become ladies. They were raised to become ladies by a whole superstructure that was put in there. But we can't ever go back to that according to these guys.
And what we've done is we've expanded the range of ways that we can be masculine and can be feminine and the roles we can play. And that is both a wonderful thing and a very challenging thing. Obviously, the world's much easier.
So I would like to hear that once again qualifying. Just on face value, expanding the roles of what it can mean to be a man and a woman. Do we not see any connections between the debauchery that's going on today and these type of statements? So you can be have three different genders as a man and wear a dress and, actually use tampons as they're trying to promote these days. He doesn't qualify it. He's talking about, we have to teach men and women how to be. Okay, well, who's doing it? Because obviously the old quote-unquote patriarchal system, they don't like at all. That oppressed women for all of history. So we have to conclude that the we is the social construct, that's society. Look at society today. That's who's going to be teaching, because he doesn't fill in any of the blanks. Well, you can be all these different ways, so it's going to be very challenging and very difficult. Okay, so how's it going to be done? I don't. I think if you even read his book, it would just be this. It would just be whatever 200, 300 pages of exactly what we're hearing. This bunch of mealy mouth pablum that doesn't give any solutions at all. Just a bunch of feels.
Society just tells you how to be.
Yeah.
Right? And all you've got to do is follow orders. That's very easy. It's very hard to be in a society where, oh wait, there's 1,000 ways to do this. Crikey, that's hard. But what we shouldn't do is just abandon people to that. What we shouldn't do is say, okay, fine, good luck figuring this out. We should be helping them figure.
Is that just nonsense? There's 1,000 ways to be a man? I mean, once again, look around today. Yes, there is. Because it's acceptable, of course, to be a complete total deadbeat, to shoot up heroin all the time, maybe not to take care of your kids and have the state do it for you, be a furry. Yeah, I mean, if you consider all those, I guess there is. What is wrong? And even people in academia, like this individual right here, have studied and confirmed that, I can't remember the exact term that they use, but it's the dilemma of choices, more or less. That when you get too many choices, you can never make a decision and you're never satisfied. So, of course, they always want to be disingenuous like he just did and say, well, when you're just told what to be and there's only one way to be. As if that was ever the case. They just completely misrepresent the history all the time. As if there wasn't hundreds of different professions of men. As if there wasn't men always that were geeks. Some were intellectual. Some were strong. Some were, pensive. Some were in literature and law. Others were blacksmiths. Others were fighters. It's just cartoonish once again, and how we're even listening to these people is very, very disturbing.
Figure it out. And I think the key thing is not to throw out the very idea of masculinity just because we're expanding it and giving it more choice. And potentially, this is a really wonderful thing that we're having here. I know we've focused on the crisis, and there's lots of really difficult things.
So that's a bit of a slip there, in my opinion. The idea is not to throw out the very idea of masculinity. Well, he's been talking all the time about how we have to help young men and boys, etc. They don't know really how to be man. They don't know how to be masculine. And so, let's not throw it out. Okay, so who is throwing it out then? Because people in this corner, myself speaking, supposedly these manosphere guys, will say it's been the feminist equality agenda that is completely trying to throw it out. That he turns his nose up and saying it's just absurd.
Things going on, but potentially this could be great. It could be wonderful going forward to say, you don't have to stop being a guy. You don't have to stop being masculine, but look at all these different things you can do now, these different ways you can be masculine. I was able to stay at home and care for my kids. That was not something that my dad had as an option. I still consider myself to be a guy, and I think I probably parented slightly differently, but what a wonderful world it is that allowed me to be that kind of guy as well as this kind of guy.
I would argue that also, I know
Yeah, once again for him and his Ivy League friends up there, well, where's the qualifier when this is happening to the mass? It's going to be a great thing, and it can't happen in mass if you want society to keep going on, unless we're going to be, of course, in the dystopian future of what they're promoting through the World Economic Forum, where you live in a pod and eat bug food and do your work in virtual reality. And it seems like that's what the goal is. That's what we're hearing in this conversation. What a wonderful world where you can do that. And as I just said, as if the version of that 200 years ago and or more of different types of men that did different types of things, if that didn't already happen. It's always been happening. These are people, once again, that are Marxists, that want to reinvent everything and have them as the new gods.
We're out of time, but I would also argue this. We were talking about teachers a little while ago, and there's a definite deficit in teachers. It's in the UK, Canada, and the United States right now. 77% of your teachers today, from preschool all the way to post-secondary, will be females.
Yes.
In the United States, 70. It's higher in other countries, actually.
Yes.
And so because those jobs are not, men don't see teaching as a a career path because they tend to be low paying, and there's very little status involved in all of that. So it's like they're not going to be selected because they're teachers. It's better to be a professional athlete or a rock star or whatever it is.
Okay, I thought that's what I came to this part here right for. That these guys too, it's better to be a professional athlete or a rock star. This is really probably, I shouldn't be that disappointed because it's revealing of the mindset of these guys here. If you guys don't follow these personalities, Rollo Tomassi and the guy sitting beside him, Michael Sartain, have hooked up in recent months, and Michael Sartain runs this outfit called Access Vegas, where he was I guess before this, or maybe within Access Vegas, I don't really know, I don't really care. He ran bikini model contests and this type of stuff, and they do this, very popular nowadays, panel type of discussions with all these hot girls where they talk about all these superficial things and etc. But, men don't want to get into teaching because men all want to be rock stars and sports stars. And not to say that small children, a large percentage of young men, wouldn't want to be that. But it's an infantile mentality and a childish conversation once again. Because once you get to around, teenage years, especially for young boys, and you start to really think about what am I going to do for a living, looking at what your father did, your older brothers, your cousins, etc., as far as trades goes or going to school or whatnot. But it speaks for itself, the mentality.
Than it is to be a teacher. And so the idea of, well, we can play these different roles now as guys, and we've got this, I can be Mr. Mom or whatever else. The problem is with those roles is that it doesn't eliminate the biological proclivities of men and women to think.
Now, it's still not, that's, it's not a bad point. It is a bit of a pushback again, but I think it even needs to go much further, and I don't think it's plausible that Rollo doesn't know this. What do you say because where they're going here, they're going to talk about this Reeves. He's a massive advocate of getting more men into the teaching space. Well, into this teaching space, under the National Education Foundation, in this university system, when you have to go and take feminist studies in academia, and it's completely dominated by this mentality, and that's what you're going to put men into, and then they're going to come in. So let's say we get the numbers, back up to, they say 77% women, he said right now. That leaves 23% of men. When my daughter went to school, I looked into this about 10 years ago in the 6th grade. There was 33 or 34 of the faculty were female. 34 faculty total, 31 were female, 3 males. And that includes the principal, of course, that was a female. I even think the vice principal. The vice principal may have been a male. That might have been one of them. But all the other administrators and everybody, it's not just that they're biologically female. It's that they come through the very far left, exact same mentality of this Mr. Reeves educational academic system. That by the time they get there, they're very indoctrinated and very programmed of how to go about things. So if we get the number up from 23%, using their numbers here, of male teachers, let's say to 40%, but nothing has changed in this paradigm. All you're going to do is get a lot more manginas in there. They're not going to be able to change anything at all. It's just going to be another exact thing that I pointed out a bit ago of making things look good. Well, we've got more guys here now. What if they're all eunuchs? Doesn't matter.
If I'm a teacher, it'd be great and a noble cause, and it's a noble profession, but I'm only going to make $45,000 a year, and
Sure.
I'm never going to be able to get with the hot girls that he's at Zook.
Yes.
That's a kind of that's
shit at me again.
whether that's a cognitive recognition or not.
It's not conscious.
So those new roles that are opening up.
Yeah, and also maybe too, maybe I'm going to be in a very toxic female feminist Marxist environment where these are all other subjects that are very worthy of analysis that many people have been doing great analysis on for years. I've got a good friend actually whose wife is a lifelong school teacher. I think she's been in the in the schools for almost 30 years, and is in a relatively, comparatively speaking, pretty decent school. And the story she's been telling for years of how they're completely unallowed to even discipline children, and the kids she's with, I believe, I think she's exclusively with 5 to 7 year olds, first, second grade. How they attack other students and teachers with scissors and throw fits. And there was one just a little while ago where one was literally mimicking with pants down, buggering the other one at the urinal. If you don't know that old school term, buggering, use your online dictionary and look it up. Trying to keep it PG friendly here for YouTube. So what kind of men are going to want to go into that system anyway? And that's look for yourself. If you don't know what is going on in academia, it's a nightmare. Me personally, I say homeschool. Don't send your kids to any of this nonsense. Okay, we're just about ready to wrap it up here. Got a couple more, and that'll be that.
Do you think it would be more impressive to have a woman working in like construction or raw sewage or something that's a longshoreman kind of thing? Would that be more impressive than, say, a woman who goes to Congress? Because we still have a deficit in those jobs. Like, as women don't choose to become, sanitation workers. Okay,
No.
they choose to be like, I want to get into a higher.
Well, I don't blame them.
Yeah,
do you?
well, yeah, I don't either.
There's another one. Very revealing of the mindset. Extremely revealing of the mindset. And once again, I'll give a little bit of credit to Rollo, that at least he's bringing that up. That I've brought up, I think, at least a couple of times already in this series, of how this agenda of making things equal for women doesn't care two damns about really making things equal for women across the board. They just want the administrative jobs to be equal, the high-paying jobs to be equal, the prestigious jobs to be equal, intellectual jobs to be equal, but nothing on the bottom tiers. As you just said, they don't want to do these jobs. And what is the answer right away? Well, I don't blame them. And then that's it. Once again, nobody says, whoa, but what about equality? Why not? What about appreciation for these young men that are doing it? Old men, all kinds of men that are doing these jobs that we never hear about. All we hear about is how defective men have always been and continue to be. That's all we hear about. And you can see why they don't get appreciation right there. Right, we could say probably in all of this, with that one statement, he answered the question and answered his whole book as to why males are doing so poorly. Because this is the attitude of the people that are running everything. Well, I don't blame them. He sure as hell would never be caught with a shovel in his hand in the hot sun on a roof all day long. Anything as it may be. Just complete, total dismissal. Right? Instead of saying, going back to his question, right? That is a good question. Would it be more impressive to have women in these things instead of being politicians? Is that what he said? Or executives or whatever it be? Because they don't want to do those jobs. Well, I don't blame them. Pretty sure he's not even going to answer. It's going to be another dodge.
Either, but the thing is if we're going to talk about, we need to see more men in this, and we need to see more.
Well, you could say the
women
same
in
thing
that.
about like healthcare assistants, care home, like pretty poorly paid. Those are almost all women.
Well, I think it's interesting that we demonize, and I'm gonna give you a point here. I think it's interesting that we demonize, like, say, major universities and say they're going to be these feminist indoctrination camps and everything else, but yet we still pay those teachers so low that I'm pretty sure.
I thought that was a pretty, they often do this, right? They're very good at this of obfuscating. So he takes one area. Well, we could make the same comparison that these, healthcare workers, home care workers, et cetera, are very poorly paid, and it's, bad work, et cetera. All right, but really, is that really equivalent compared to what we were promised by feminism, that women would be 50% represented in everything across the board, and not only could they do it just as men, they would do it better. And the world would be a much better place. And we've seen absolutely none of that. So they'll kind of, give you they'll refute you, so to speak, on one little area of that when he takes an example, and then just ignore the rest and go on go on to the rest, to basically, shut up.
Socialism looks like a pretty damn good deal to people who are in those institutions, because we.
Yeah, and for me anyway, that's a whole other conversation. Oh, we need to pay these teachers more under this paradigm. Nah, forget it. I'm one personally. I'd like to see the whole thing completely trashed and go back to completely unrelated. Might be video in the future. Just thoughts that I have had over the years of as my progression in questioning so many of the memes and the narratives that I was raised with, of the way that they paint it before modern mass government schooling, as though everybody was ignorant and nothing got done and people couldn't even read and write, and this modern schooling system has saved us. How many memes have you seen where people talk about teachers being heroes, etc.? And I know I'll probably piss a lot of people off here, but I'm sorry. And I'm sure there are some very good teachers out there still, but in the aggregate, in the mass, I've worked in a business here where I've worked with extensively with high school students and high school graduates, young college kids, and it's alarming what they don't know. It's really alarming that they can barely, and these are high school graduates, and sometimes even college graduates or people that are well into studying at college, and they don't know simple geography. And these things are quite widely known these days. There's all kinds of YouTube channels that are dedicated to these interviews on the streets, where they ask them these very, very basic questions. Point out. I saw one just a few days ago, where they took a woman, and I don't have any reason to doubt her. She looked very sincere. She said that she was a college graduate. They showed her a map of the world, asked her to point out and name one country. Couldn't do it. And there's hundreds and hundreds of these interviews. Mark Dice has done many of them over the years. That is just astounding. But that's a sidebar anyway.
We don't take care of those teachers. We don't value them enough. If you want to put more men into teaching positions, you've got to make it more appealing. Got to incentivize it.
But let me just add one more thing. It also goes back to a theme I keep on touching on. That is very revealing as to why we're in the state that we're in, because these are some of the guys that are supposedly addressing these important issues. But you don't ever hear the conversation about values and ethics and work ethic and sacrifice, honor, duty. It's always just, money's going to fix the problem. If we just paid these people more money, something I'm going to include in a video here very soon are passages from an excellent book that I read years ago called Who Stole Feminism by Christina Hoff Sommers, where she shows the egregious lies defaming men that have been put into the curriculum of universities years ago. And I don't know about recently. It was years ago that I read that book, but she had done follow-up. She had done a few editions of that book. I think the first edition might have been the mid-'90s and the second one was early 2000s. And by the second edition, even though that she had publicized this very broadly, and she has a very high profile, and brought it to the attention of university faculties everywhere that these were complete lies, they were still being used. These books were not reprinted or retracted. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're still being used today. So you can throw $1 million at all of these teachers. As the saying says, bad data in and bad data out. It's not going to matter in any way, shape, or form. You're trying to build a castle on sand.
And it will never, until we incentivize those things, it's going to
but
just
we
be
knew
what
that
it is.
too. We had to incentivize, we had to help women get into traditionally male roles with scholarships and so on too. So we should do the same. We need a massive recruitment drive of men into our schools, especially to teach subjects like English, because if they don't see men in those institutions, they're not around men, they don't have male teachers showing them, to some extent, just performing masculinity, just showing what it means to be a guy. Back to this point about Andrew Tate, right? If you have a boy, say, who maybe has lost touch with his father, maybe there aren't many men in his community, maybe he doesn't go to church or there aren't school, groups around, then he goes to school where there are no male teachers, no male coaches. It's perfectly possible that he could get sort of close to adolescence and not have had any strong male role model.
Yep, but it's also very superficial and shallow once again in the analysis. Because you can maybe make the schools 50% or 75%, men that come through this education system that have been completely henpecked, indoctrinated, emasculated, shamed now for a few generations through every message that they receive. And by the time they get to adulthood, maybe the only example that they're giving to these young boys is how to be an emasculated eunuch, how not to really stand up for yourself, how just to go along with the feminist agenda. It's not going to address the issue. Okay, upon completion of the last video, I realized there was a point, something that they had brought up here that I definitely wanted to respond to, that I wanted to include, and actually it's going to work out for the best that I added in on the end here, because it's going to be a great jumping off point for maybe even the next video or videos very soon to come. Take a listen, and then I'll explain from there.
One, this is nefarious and conspiratorial, and then there's another group of people.
Sorry, I didn't back it up enough. He said that there are people that believe that it's either one or two things. Let me see if I can back it up a little bit more here so you can see exactly what he says.
Fewer women in college in 1972, and now 15 points higher today. There are people who believe, one, this is nefarious and conspiratorial, and then there's another group of people that believe this is just sort of like negligent, and you had identity politics where, like, I'm worried about getting money for my group, and I just forgot about your group. And you believe it's the second, not the first, that this is just a function of, it just happened to, this is a secondary order, but it wasn't conspiratorial or nefarious. Can you go into that? Because you understand, there's a lot of people watching, this is YouTube, there's a lot of people watching, that's absolutely what they believe. They call it the Matrix. They have all these different names for it. So if you could go specifically into your beliefs about that.
I think that that's an incredibly dangerous idea, that the problems that men and boys are facing are the result of some kind of conspiracy, some kind of feminist conspiracy that the women are out to get the men. And of course, you can always find some extremists online who'll say some stuff, or you can go back and read Judith Butler or something.
You guys like, check out Kill All Men podcast. Kill All Men. It's on Apple right now. You can subscribe.
And then you can generalize that out if you really want to kind of believe in that. But know what's actually happening. Like, why are men struggling in the labor market? Not because women came along, but because of deindustrialization and free trade. Like, why are men struggling in education? Because the education system isn't quite as friendly towards male styles of learning and towards men as it is to girls and women. Girls have a natural advantage in the education system now. That's showing up in our results. But it's not because some cabal of feminists got together 100 years ago and said, you know what, if we design the education system this way, then eventually, a century from now,
we'll be in charge. We'll be in charge. Yes, I get it.
Completely crazy. But it's also crazy not to look at that gap and say, hold on.
Okay, so this is, once again, just completely, totally disingenuous. Where to even start? I could have stopped it about 5 times through that whole little rant there. These are things that just make my skin crawl again. So, first and foremost, okay, just the first ones that come to mind. To say it wasn't like a group got, well, let me back up. To say that there isn't this conspiracy, no, there isn't a conspiracy. It's completely, totally open. You can look into it. And the reason that I said that this would be a great one to end at the end as a jumping off point for videos to come is because that's what I'll do in the videos to come. I am going to show the evidence for this. So it's not a conspiracy. It's completely, totally open. These people don't just look at it and talk about it. And then if you do look at it and talk about it, they'll do exactly what he does here. They'll just minimize it and say you're misinterpreting it, or they'll call it a struggle for rights or something as such. Okay. Then he goes on to say that it wasn't like 100 years ago a bunch of feminists got together and had a meeting. No, exactly, it was that. And no, Mr. Reeves, it wasn't 100 years ago. It was in 1848, more than 100 years ago, at Seneca Falls in New York State, with the publishing of the Declaration of Sentiments. That reads very closely to the Communist Manifesto, which was released in the same year. That's subject for all other videos again there. Okay. They actually did do this. They were tied into Marxism. There is so much material that can be done on this. And then the other tactic is to make it cartoonish, as if it was just this little group planning that we're just going to, take things over and rubbing their hands together. That's infantile. It's not the way that the world works. Okay. It went very slowly, intertwined within massive systems of banking, academia, culture-forming institutions that got rooted in and changed the mentality. These type of reactions that are so, and finally at the end of this, watching this time and time again, I don't think I can really say anymore. Are they that dumb? Or are they that obtuse? No, I think it's by design to make it look like it's so crazy. And even if it was a conspiracy, to say people that don't conspire, I don't know what world you live in, but there's all kinds of people doing hard prison time right now for conspiracy. Just spend a few days on a job, especially in a corporate environment, if you don't think people conspire. That's pretty well all they do. If you don't know what a conspiracy is, look up the definition. But a final word before I end up here. So I read a book years ago called The Creature from Jekyll Island that I found just fascinating, where the author puts out a thesis and shows the evidence of a worldwide conspiracy through the banking system, particularly the Federal Reserve, and how that extends to the whole world. He goes very, very deep. It's a 500-something page book. I found that book so fascinating that as soon as I finished it, I started reading it again, and I read it front to back twice in a row. When I read that book, it was so well written, so well expressed, so well footnoted, that it was just so hard to ignore what he was saying. At the same time, the reaction is, this can't be this bad. It can't be this fraudulent. It can't be this diabolical. And he says in the beginning of the book, for people that would have that type of reaction, they would say, well, show the proof. Okay, so I'm using this example for what this guy says here. This is just, for what Mr. Reeves says here on the screen. This is just crazy. He makes fun of it. He mocks it. Okay, so going back to G. Edward Griffin's book, as he responds, in these type of matters, done at the highest level of society by the most powerful people, they are done in secret, behind closed doors. What we have is evidence, even by our own courts of law. You do not have to have 100% proof. It is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. It is said once you compile and amass a certain amount of evidence to show guilt, then guilt will be determined. And there could still be some doubt. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's what I want to do moving forward in much of my work, of showing that you explain to me if there isn't people that, whether they're sitting in a room and planning it, or whether it has, I don't know the way to speak to it. I definitely won't be in agreement of him of just saying, well, these are just benevolent happenings that have disenfranchised men. That's his position. There's been no malintent here. So whether it's people planning the malintent to target them, which I think there is massive evidence for, or the results of their policies are resulting in creating a hostile environment for men and disenfranchising them, which serves the powers that be's purpose, and they do nothing to stop it and actually encourage it, neither one is acceptable. And there's a ton of evidence for both of those, besides this idiocy that this individual is saying here on the screen. Anyway, I just wanted to add that one final piece in, and we'll look forward to you in the next one.